Happy Holy Week! We are getting ready to celebrate the greatest mystery in our whole faith, the mystery of the resurrection of Jesus. And we're going to think a lot this week about his passion. And I have two stories that I want to share with you that are about the same thing, that are just a little bit different. These are some of my favorite stories for this time of year, so I'm going to read them to you. The first is called The Little Rose of Sharon by Gurley, illustrated by Jonke. Spring came to the newly made world, and every day a certain little rose grew taller and more beautiful. Surely the Creator will be proud of me, she hoped, as the color deepened in her petals. The little rose watched as the hills and valley of Sharon came to life. Daffodils grew on the hillside, almond trees bloomed full and white, and the sweet smell of myrtle blossoms filled the air. As the large green leaves on the fig tree above her danced gently in the breeze, the little rose looked up and saw a dove sitting on a nest made of twigs and grass. Inside the nest was a tiny white egg. While the mother dove flew over the hillside looking for seeds and nuts, the father dove sat on the egg and made soft cooing sounds. Someday, very soon, thought the little rose, the baby dove will hatch out of its egg. Early one morning, as the sun peeked over the eastern sky, the little rose saw the Creator. He was walking through the cool grass, looking at all his trees and flowers. Sometimes he would stop for a moment and listen to a bird's song, or sit in the shade of an olive tree and watch the sheep grazing on distant hills. The little rose stood straight and tall and opened her petals as far as she could. She hoped the Creator would notice her as he walked by. Soon he came walking toward her. Surely the Creator will be pleased with my beautiful petals, she thought happily. Then the Creator stood before her. For a long time he looked down at her deep red petals and smiled. Before he turned to go, he bent down and breathed her sweet smell. The little rose felt her heart would burst with joy. He noticed me, she thought, and he smiled at me. Truly, he must think I am beautiful. Later that evening, as she drifted off to sleep, the little rose was still remembering the smile of the Creator. During the night, a storm rolled in from the Mediterranean Sea. The wind howled through the trees and the rain beat down on the shrubs and flowers. The little rose bent and swayed in the storm. She was frightened of losing her petals. As the rain beat against her, she held onto her petals with all her strength. Finally, the storm ended. When morning light filled the sky, the little rose was proud to see that none of her petals had fallen to the ground. But when she looked down, she saw a white shape on the ground below her. It was the tiny dove's egg nestled deeply in the grass. It must have fallen out of the nest during the storm, she thought. Surely the mother and father dove will find it. She wished she could call out to them and tell them where the egg was lying, but she could only watch as the doves flew back and forth looking for the egg and making sad and mournful sounds. All day the doves searched for the tiny egg, but they never saw it in the grass beneath the rose. When the sky began to darken, the doves flew back to the branches of the fig tree. If the egg is not kept warm, the baby dove inside it will die, thought the little rose as the evening breeze began to blow coolly. She was sad to think that the baby dove might never break out of its shell and learn to fly. If only I could keep it warm. As the moon slowly rose in the sky, covering the earth with a silver light, the little rose thought of the only way that she could keep the egg warm through the chilly night. One by one, she dropped her petals and covered the tiny white dove's egg. When the last one fell and the rose petal blanket was complete, the little rose fell asleep to the mournful cooing of the doves. Early the next morning, the little rose was wakened by tiny chirping sounds. What could it be, she wondered. And then she noticed the smallest movement beneath the fallen petals. Suddenly, a tiny dove's beak poked out from beneath the rose petal blanket. The baby dove is alive, she thought with joy as the chirping grew louder. The mother and father heard the baby dove and flew down from the fig tree. The little rose watched as they lifted their baby from the rose petals and carried it back to their nest. Later that morning, as the little rose was listening to the gentle cooing of the doves, she saw the Creator walking on the hillside. "Oh dear," she thought, "I hope he doesn't notice me. Without my petals, I am no longer beautiful." The little rose was so ashamed she looked down, but when the Creator stood before her, he gently reached out and touched her stem. "You have given all you had to save the life of the baby dove," said the Creator. The little rose felt warm inside at the sound of his voice. "One day when my son lives on this earth, he too will give everything he has." The little rose looked up into the gentle eyes of the Creator. "Because of the love you have shown for the baby dove, I will call my son the Rose of Sharon, for he too will give everything he has and show the world my love." The Creator tenderly touched her stem once more as he walked on through the hillside. The little rose joyfully lifted her face to the warm light of the sun. That is a beautiful story of sacrifice. It is hard to make sacrifices, but sometimes God takes our sacrifices and he makes beautiful, beautiful things out of them. Here's another story called The Tale of the Three Trees. It's a traditional folktale retold by Angela Elwekk Hunt with illustrations by Tim Jonke, the same person who illustrated The Rose of Sharon.
Tim Jonke.
Once upon a mountaintop, 3 little trees stood and dreamed of what they wanted to become when they grew up. The first little tree looked up at the stars twinkling like diamonds above him. "I want to hold treasure," he said. "I want to be covered with gold and filled with precious stones. I will be the most beautiful treasure chest in the world." The second little tree looked out at the small stream trickling by on its way to the ocean. "I want to be a strong sailing ship," he said. "I want to travel mighty waters and carry powerful kings. I will be the strongest ship in the world." The third little tree looked down into the valley below where busy men and busy women worked in a busy town. "I don't want to leave this mountaintop at all," she said. "I want to grow so tall that when people stop to look at me, they will raise their eyes to heaven and think of God. I will be the tallest tree in the world." Years passed. The rains came, the sun shone, and the little trees grew tall. One day, 3 woodcutters climbed the mountain. The first woodcutter looked at the first tree and said, "This tree is beautiful. It is perfect for me." With a swoop of his shining axe, the first tree fell. "Now I shall be made into a beautiful chest," thought the first tree. "I shall hold wonderful treasure." The second woodcutter looked at the second tree and said, "This tree is strong. It is perfect for me." With a swoop of his shining axe, the second tree fell. "Now I shall sail mighty waters," thought the second tree. "I shall be a strong ship fit for kings." The third tree felt her heart sink when the last woodcutter looked her way. She stood straight and tall and pointed bravely to heaven, but the woodcutter never even looked up. "Any kind of tree will do for me," he muttered. With a swoop of his shining axe, the third tree fell. The first tree rejoiced when the woodcutter brought him to a carpenter's shop, but the busy carpenter was not thinking about treasure chests. Instead, his work-worn hands fashioned the tree into a feed box for animals. The once beautiful tree was not covered with gold or filled with treasure. He was coated with sawdust and filled with hay for hungry farm animals. The second tree smiled when the woodcutter took him to a shipyard, but no mighty sailing ships were being made that day. Instead, the once strong tree was hammered and sawed into a simple fishing boat. Too small and too weak to sail an ocean or even a river, he was taken to a little lake. Every day he brought in loads of dead, smelly fish. The third tree was confused when the woodcutter cut her into strong beams and left her in a lumber yard. "What happened?" the once tall tree wondered. "All I ever wanted to do was stay on the mountaintop and point to God." Many, many days and nights passed. The 3 trees nearly forgot their dreams. But one night, Golden starlight poured over the first tree as a young woman placed her newborn baby in the feed box. "I wish I could make a cradle for him," her husband whispered. The mother squeezed his hand and smiled as the starlight shone on the smooth and sturdy wood. "This manger is beautiful," she said. And suddenly, the first tree knew he was holding the greatest treasure in the world. One evening, a tired traveler and his friends crowded into the old fishing boat. The traveler fell asleep as the second tree quietly sailed out into the lake. Soon, a thundering and thrashing storm arose. The little tree shuddered. He knew he did not have the strength to carry so many passengers safely through the wind and rain. The tired man awakened. He stood up, stretched out his hand, and said, "Peace." The storm stopped as quickly as it had begun. And suddenly the second tree knew he was carrying the King of heaven and earth. One Friday morning, the third tree was startled when her beams were yanked from the forgotten woodpile. She flinched as she was carried through an angry, jeering crowd. She shuddered when soldiers nailed a man's hands to her. She felt ugly and harsh and cruel. But on Sunday morning, when the sun rose and the earth trembled with joy beneath her, the third tree knew that God's love had changed everything. It had made the first tree beautiful. It had made the second tree strong. And every time people thought of the third tree, they would think of God. That was better than being the tallest tree in the world.